Alright, so we're going to start up now with our next section on community ecology, looking at predation in particular, but also a little bit of parasitism as well. And so with this general type of association or mutualism, we have two organisms now. One of them is getting a benefit, and the other one is being harmed or hurt by the presence of the first organism. So it's a plus-minus association like we saw back in our original table on different types of symbiosis. So now we have a situation where a predator, particularly, specifically in this case, the predator is going to have some sort of harmful negative effect on the prey, typically consuming it completely. Parasitism, on the other hand, is going to be a situation where a parasite doesn't typically consume an entire prey, but consumes only part of it, and may only consume part of it for its entire lifespan. So predation, again, is consuming one organism completely, and many of them, over their lifetime for predation. Whereas parasitism is you have a situation where a parasite consumes part of a host over a period of time. And typically, again, with a parasite, you're dealing with maybe one or at most a couple of hosts during the lifespan of the parasite. Herbivory could be really considered either predation or parasitism, or even mutualism in some cases, because in some cases the presence of an herbivore actually stimulates the plant to grow further than what it would grow in the absence of the herbivore. But if you imagine a situation where you have, say, a mouse consuming seeds, right? It's herbivory because seeds are a plant product, but since individually each one of those seeds could become an entire tree on its own, each seed is basically an embryo, right? We talked about that previously in other chapters. If a mouse consumes 5,000 seeds, then it's consumed 5,000 trees. It's more like a predator in that case. You don't typically think of a mouse being a predator, but based on this definition, it actually would be. Versus if you have a caterpillar feeding on leaves of a tree, it's only consuming one host, it's only consuming part of it, and chances are it's probably not going to go to any other host during its lifetime. So in that case, caterpillar would be more like a parasite, whereas the mouse would be more like a predator. One thing that's sometimes a bit surprising is that oftentimes predation can actually lead to increased community diversity. Now, you might think that, well, why would an animal eating some other group of organisms, why would that benefit diversity? But think about what would happen if you didn't have a predator, right? If you didn't have a predator, typically what will occur will be one organism, one competitor, will be the dominant one. It'll be the one that is going to outcompete everybody else. It's not going to let them persist in the environment because it's a superior competitor. It gets more resources, and therefore the prey species are going to be dominated by maybe one or two really dominant species. If you have a keystone predator in particular, what they will do is they will tend to focus on the most abundant prey first. So whichever competitor is the most common, and that typically might be the one that's most competitive, then the predator is going to consume more of it than anybody else, and so therefore the less superior competitors are going to be able to persist in the environment. And so we call those keystone predators. The idea with a keystone in an arch is that it's what holds the rest of the arch together, and if you take away the keystone, the rest of the structure will fall apart. A keystone predator is very much the same way. If you take away the keystone predator, the rest of the community might very well fall apart. That dominant competitor species might be able to come in and push everybody else out, thereby leading to overall decreased community diversity. If the predator is there, if it can focus on those really dominant competitors more than anybody else, keystone predator can actually allow the other ones to persist in the environment. Oftentimes what will happen here too is the prey populations, right? If there is no predator, prey populations will go through cycles of boom and bust. And in some cases, the crash part of the cycle could be so severe the population might actually go extinct. There's a lot of concern about that in especially the eastern U.S. with white-tailed deer that are in population densities way, way above what they would be naturally because there are no natural predators here. And there's no wolf, there's no mountain lion kind of population, so the only real hunting pressure that deer get is by humans, and that's really not the same thing as what they would experience from a natural predator. So population explosion that's persisted in the eastern U.S. has been due to the removal of predators over the past several decades. Oftentimes you'll see this too on islands where a species establishes on these islands because islands typically don't have a ton of species. There's a really good chance there's not going to be a predator there, so any prey that it establishes on the island is going to be able to grow very, very quickly, and then very likely after outstripping its food source, crash to zero or at least very, very low levels. All right, so with predation, with exploitation, with parasitism and herbivory, all of those, there's an idea in evolutionary biology called the Red Queen hypothesis. And so I actually put this on the slide, this little quote from Alice Through the Looking Glass that talks about this character called the Red Queen. And so up here we have this quote in white. That's something that Alice says. And this quote in red is something that's said by the Red Queen. And basically what she says here, the gist of this, is that where she lives, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. You have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. You're never really going to get anywhere. The best you can hope to do is just stay in the same place. And so with exploitation, with predation, with parasitism and herbivory, the idea is that you have to evolve as fast as you can just to stay in the same place in terms of fitness. Because as you change, all of your natural enemies are changing as well. As prey come up with new ways to avoid being eaten, predators are doing the exact same thing. Predators are coming up with new ways to catch prey, new ways to overcome prey defenses, better ways to catch prey. And so there's what we call a co-evolutionary arms race between predator and prey, whereas one changes, the other one changes as well. If the prey comes up with better camouflage, the predator comes up with a better way to find the prey, maybe not using sight, or maybe using really, really advanced sight, something like that, to help them find those now camouflaged prey. With predator and prey, really the first time we see this happening evolutionarily, geologically, even in that regard, because it is a long time span, is back in the Cambrian era, which goes back to around 530 or so million years ago. What occurred during that period of time was initially animals which had been evolving slowly for a little while prior to the Cambrian explosion. Explosion in this case doesn't mean like literally an explosion, it means an explosion of diversity. What happened was animals developed armor. And so where you had predator and prey previously, it wasn't quite to the same level or the extent that we saw it after prey started to come up with defenses. So once you have prey like this pangolin that's armored, it's got these really tough keratinized plates on its back, kind of like an old world version of an armadillo, predators now all of a sudden have to either A, starve, or B, find some way around that defense. So predators will change to come up with some way to get around that defense. And as they do that, the prey are doing the same thing. The prey are already working on better defenses evolutionarily to help them get away from or at least minimize predation from those predators. So this back and forth leads to diversity. More and more specialized adaptations show up to help prey avoid being eaten and help predators catch their prey. So predators get better defenses. Even plants, we don't really think about plants necessarily as being like real heavily defended, but plants can produce physical structures. They can produce sap or gum or resin to help protect them against herbivores. They can produce spines or thorns to protect them against herbivores. They can even produce chemicals. Probably the most common way for plants to defend themselves is by producing secondary compounds, which are very toxic to animals and can either go from anywhere from just being something that tastes bad all the way up to something which actually kills a predator or makes it sterile or minimizes its reproductive output, something like that. So plants actually are pretty good at defending themselves in many cases. So what we're going to look at now is kind of the progression of things that a prey species might develop in order to avoid being eaten, basically. So your best bet, if you're a prey species that's possibly about to be eaten by a predator, your very best bet, your safest thing would be to avoid being detected, because if the predator never finds you, you don't have to worry about being attacked, right? So we're looking at things like camouflage here. There's all different types of camouflage. There's one that's called a simple background color matching, where you try to take on the appearance of whatever is behind you, which is something that some species do. White animal on a white background is somewhat hard to see. It's a lot harder to see than a brown animal on a white background. So in that case, there's some background color matching. We can see counter shading. Counter shading is where an organism appears to be one color from the dorsal side and a different color from the ventral side, different on the back versus the belly, for example. So we'll see some examples of counter shading too. Disruptive coloration, which is where you have either colors of shapes that help break up your outline or silhouette, or you have structures that project out away from your silhouette to help break up your outline, so it makes you harder for predators to see. This grasshopper in this picture, right? There's a bunch of rocks. There's some lichen growing on these rocks, maybe some moss growing on the rocks, and then right here is a grasshopper. You can see its eye, you can see its antenna, the rest of its head, 1, 2, 3 legs. We can see its thorax, one of its wings back through here on the abdomen. That grasshopper is pretty well camouflaged, and as long as he doesn't move to give himself away, predators are going to have a pretty hard time finding that grasshopper. So it's doing a good job both of background color matching and with some disruptive coloration. You see its body is mostly dark gray, but then it's got these paths of light gray passing through it to help break up its outline. So it doesn't really look like a grasshopper as much as it would if it was just a solid color. There are animals that will go into mimicry. I'll show you some examples of walking sticks, things that are leaf mimics, things that even mimic rocks, or even bird droppings sitting on a leaf. There aren't too many predators that are going to find bird droppings too appealing. So if you happen to be an animal that looks like that, it's going to be a pretty good way to avoid being detected by your predator. And there are behavioral camouflage mechanisms as well, believe it or not, things that will try to mimic a rattlesnake, or things that try to mimic harmful or a well-defended prey, even though they themselves may not be. That would also be a type of camouflage as well. And one thing we have to remember as we go into these sections on different types of camouflage, just because something might appear to be relatively obvious to us may not be to the actual predator who's trying to find the prey. Or just because something is hard for us to see doesn't mean there isn't a predator out there that's able to detect it. So we're dealing with some human bias here. We're dealing with our own senses, our own features that we tend to find most helpful when looking at the environment, but other organisms may not use the same types of sensory structures. They may not use sight that much, for example. They might go on smell or sound or electroreception or heat reception more than just visual signals. So we have to be careful about that bias. All right, so here is our background color matching. We have a ptarmigan here. Ptarmigan's a little bird that lives way up north in the tundra. In the summertime, it's got a brown appearance because the background it is around is often kind of a brownish color. And in the wintertime, it takes on this white appearance, right? So we see this bird, which is very well matching its background. It's also very bright white. But the problem with this one is you can still see the silhouette. You can still definitely see the outline of the bird. The eyes and beak especially give it away. So even though it's somewhat camouflaged, it's not perfect, right? So there's it leaves something to be desired in this case. This frog over here is a little bit better. It's got some little bumps and it's got some different colors on its skin to help it kind of break up its outline some. It does a pretty decent job of matching its substrate here behind it with the background color matching. Countershading is a fairly common scenario where we see animals that are typically lightly colored on the belly and dark colored from the top. And so we can see that in prey species. Little songbirds or squirrels have light bellies and dark backs. And you can imagine why that might be. If the squirrel's sitting in a tree, if there's a hawk looking down on it, typically the ground and the tree around it's going to be fairly dark, and so you, as a squirrel, want your back to be dark as well. If you're an animal on the ground looking up, trying to hunt squirrels, light-colored belly, colored by light-colored sky behind the squirrel as you're looking up, again leads to camouflage. Same thing with the songbird. But even predators can do this, right? Predators can be light on the belly, dark on the back. Sharks, if you're above them in the water looking down, their back is almost always like a dark slate blue color, which is hard to see because of the dark water below it. And if you're below the shark looking up, again, you've got like a backlit light sky and this light colored belly in front of that. It makes it relatively hard to see. All right, disruptive coloration is next. Now we're going to have physical features to help break up the outline of the animal itself. So things to help break up that silhouette. We've got, in the picture on the left, we've got tree frogs. Right? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 tree frogs, which are fairly hard to see. Even if this picture wasn't zoomed in, especially if the picture wasn't zoomed in, they would be hard to see. Seahorses have some of the best camouflage out there when it comes to flaps and flanges and things to help break out the silhouette. They do a very, very good job of camouflaging themselves. They're really hard to find. Even if you know you have one right in front of you, they can be difficult to find. Classic military camouflage, right? Your old black and brown and green BDUs. Classic camouflage breaks up the silhouette. It doesn't really look like anything per se, but it does do a decent job of breaking up the silhouette, so it's harder for maybe the enemy to pick up your outline if you're some distance away. Tiger stripe camouflage, both literal and military grade tiger stripe. In the jungle, where tigers are sort of endemic, the stripes on the body help to mimic the shadows cast by vegetation, so it breaks up the silhouette and makes it much harder to see. In that case, for the prey. But it's kind of the same idea. You're breaking up the silhouette, which gives you a better shot at camouflaging yourself or hiding yourself. We've got animals here who are matching inedible objects. So a walking stick on the left. On the right over here, we have a mantis. Same group as praying mantis, but this one is a leaf mimic. And so this one has gone to some of the most extreme lengths to try to make itself look like something that maybe an herbivore wouldn't want to feed on. This looks like a leaf that has already been chewed up. Head, forelegs, middle legs here. The hind legs are kind of tucked up underneath here. The abdomen's flat and broad like a leaf, but it looks like it's been chewed up. And a lot of times herbivores will preferentially avoid plants that have already been fed upon because plants that have been fed upon oftentimes will increase concentrations of poisonous chemicals, so it's not something you really want to eat. And not only that, this particular fake leaf has on it these two spots. And these two spots are meant to resemble the eggs of a parasitoid wasp. And parasitoid wasps are the enemy of the enemy, which, as you know, is probably the friend, right? So the predators have their own problems to deal with. They have their own parasites that will come along and feed on them and their offspring. So what they're going to do is as those predators are moving through the environment, if they see what they think are eggs of their own natural enemies, they're going to stay away from this. Because there's a chance here this could be dangerous. These could actually be real eggs, and if those hatch, they could be lethal to you or your offspring. So you're better off to bypass this. This leaf is already pretty ratty. It's been chewed upon. It looks like it's already been half eaten, and it's got these eggs on it. Of course, neither of those things are actually true. This is all a disguise of the mantis to try to avoid being eaten. But the predator is probably going to leave that alone. All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is behavioral patterns with camouflage. And one thing you want to think about here is the level of activity that you might pursue if you are camouflaged. There's nothing that will give away your position faster than movement. If you're camouflaged, that's great. The more still you're able to sit, the better off you are. If you're fidgeting around, if you're moving all the time, if you're not sitting in one place, then that's going to give you away. You'd probably also want to be a solitary species. Things that are really well camouflaged often tend to be those that don't live in big groups, because if you live in a big group, there's a better chance that somebody might screw it up for the rest of the group by moving or acting the wrong way, which could draw the attention of a predator and may even cause that predator to attack you. So you're better off to be a loner in the case of species that are camouflaged. Species that are camouflaged will also almost always go toward a background that facilitates their camouflage. There have been all kinds of studies done, like this grasshopper study here. They took grasshoppers of different colors, red grasshoppers, green grasshoppers. They gave them a choice of backgrounds, red versus green, and almost without fail, red grasshoppers go to red backgrounds, green grasshoppers go to green backgrounds. It would do you no good to go to the opposite, because you'd completely defeat the purpose of your camouflage. So they're also behaviorally programmed instinctively, genetically, through their DNA to go toward a background which looks somewhat like themselves. And of course, the ultimate camouflage would be in species that are able to change color at will. So you're looking at things like chameleons are okay. Chameleons are pretty good. They maybe get the most like fame for being able to change their color, but they're actually not as good even as some of the fishes that are out there, and also some of the mollusks. Flounder are really, really good color changers. They can change instantaneously because of the use of what are called chromatophores in their skin. Octopi are the same way. They can change literally instant by instant to match the background as the background changes. So they can change, at will to look like the background. Instead of trying to find a background that looks like them, they just simply change their bodies to match the background, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. The other thing to think about here too is what you would do as a predator if your prey was camouflaged. What could you do to help maximize the chances of you finding your prey? And so one thing you might want to think about is, what about activity patterns? Do you want to be a sit-and-wait hunter, like an ambush hunter type thing, or do you want to be one that's out there constantly moving through the environment, maybe hoping to scare up a prey every now and then? And chances are it's probably the second one, right? If you're hunting a prey that sits still, sitting still yourself is not going to be a recipe for success. You want to be out there moving around. You want to be doing something to maybe startle a prey, get them to move, get them to give away their position, get them to somehow not be still, so you actually have a target to attack. And that's typically the case for things that hunt camouflage prey. They're going to tend to be more active, actively moving, actively searching, trying to scare up the prey and get them to give away their position so they can be attacked. All right, so a little more in the way of color change. We've seen these moths before, light-colored moths on light-colored trees versus dark-colored moths on dark-colored trees. These, by the way, are the same species. They're just different morphs of the same species, but you can see which one does better depending on the background, right? We've got a flounder over here. Flounder, we've got some fins, pectoral fin. This would be like probably the anal fin back here. This is the eye, this is the mouth, kind of like a frowny mouth right there. So that's a flounder. Again, it's really super camouflaged. The sand around it's almost exactly the same color. If you were to place this fish over a solid black background, the entire fish would be solid black. It changes moment by moment, instant by instant. Chameleons can change pretty quickly, but nowhere near as fast as either a flounder or an octopus could change. These guys are also pretty amazing when it comes to color change. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to cut off here, and I will pick up with the next section.